Welcome to this CPD event. On behalf of IPS, I welcome you all. And this August month, after a gap of maybe 1.5 months, we are taking this 6th CPD of IQS in 2015. Now I call Mr. Ajit to tell about our speaker, distinguished speaker. Please, Mr. Ajit, please.
Good evening, everyone. The topic for the day, dealing with fit for purpose obligation in construction contracts. You need a speaker who is fit for the purpose to deal with such a topic. It's a recipe for the legal, for the lawyers. And IQS has appropriately found an apt speaker who has a wide range of knowledge and experience, starting from cost to claims. Cost, contracts, commercial, arbitration, legal are all the speciality which the speaker for tonight possesses. He would definitely go through this very onerous or difficult obligation which a contractor has to take on, and he would probably extend his speech to say how various jurisdictions receive this obligation. Having said that, the speaker, Mr. R. Venkat, is a founding partner of CQ Consultants. CQ, as I understand, stands for Commercial Contracts and Claims. He has over 30 years of experience. He is known to many of you. He has trained over 600 professionals across GCC, and most importantly, he is one amongst us, though he possesses various fellowships from the Institute of CIA and from the MCA Institute. Having said that, let me welcome the distinguished speaker for tonight to give you his experience on a topic fit for purpose.
Good evening, friends. First of all, thank you for coming on a weekday. Maybe the topic may be a little odd. Maybe that's the reason I found that the audience may not be that strong enough today, unlike the last one. I would like to thank IAQS for giving me an opportunity. In fact, from here I started my new avatar as a trainer, as a speaker, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And they have been with me all my work all this time. I also understand how difficult it is to arrange CPDs month after month. I will tell you a little bit of the background of this topic. On 20th February, night time, when I was just roaming around at Baldubai, our president, Mr. Varghese, called me and he said that, can you be a standby speaker for tomorrow? We have a speaker arranged, but we are not sure. So, if you could prepare a topic for tomorrow's presentation, it would be great. Fortunately, I had written an article on this topic for Indian Institute of Technical Arbitrators. So the stuff was there, only I have to make it as a presentation. Put together a small presentation, and I had that USB stick with me. Luckily the speaker came, so I don't have to present it. I was not that prepared, I would be honest about it. Then after that he said, okay, next month he would be the speaker. I was like a cricket 12th man. I was trying for an opportunity to be in the playing level. So it went on for some time. Thankfully I got a chance now to present whatever I prepared. Okay, this topic is actually, I don't know how much you are all familiar with. It's a very tricky topic. It's a very terse kind of thing. Maybe the red book contract is not having much importance to that. Whereas if you have been working on a yellow book or a silver book, this will be one of the obligations of the contractor. So we are going to make it very simple. It's fit for purpose. It's only 3 words. So it's going to be what it is, why it is important, and how are we going to deal with that. So perhaps you can have an early dinner today. Perhaps. Okay. But I'm going to start from a roundabout route. I'm going to tell you with an historical background. Yeah, these days, these kind of things are very attractive. Let's try to understand from a different perspective what is fit for purpose. As usual, there's a story. Long ago, once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a king and a prince. Of course, the king was very fond of his son. He was a very kind person, but unfortunately, he's short-tempered, and at times he cannot express his mind very well. Yeah, there's a king, that's a prince. One day, the king had a dream. Stories have a dream. There has to be some kind of a twist there. He had a dream. A beautiful fairy came in his mind. And, okay, that was the fairy, you can imagine that from where I got the inspiration. The fairy crowned the prince with a nicely looking a crown, which was very unique and it was different. And he has never seen that kind of a crown. So he was astonished at the beauty of the crown and he was just wondering how nice it is. So next day, he called all his ministers. He wanted to replicate that crown for his prince, for the coronation ceremony. So he told that I want to make a crown similar to the one what I had in my dream. You have to follow the story very well. I will give a twist in the end. So they told that it's not a big deal. We have a lot of artists here. You just explain how was your dream. The artist can draw it nicely. Then we can get it done. It's not a big deal. So he was asked to explain the dream to an artist who was supposed to make the crown. Unfortunately, as we know that the king could not explain his mind very well. Whatever the artist was trying to draw, it was nowhere near whatever had his dream. So he was a little fed up with that. Then he called all his subjects in a public place. He made it to announce that if somebody can make a crown, what he had in his dream, they will get the reward as weight of the gold equal to the weight. That's a reward. Yeah. But there is a caveat there. If somebody could not do it correctly, they want to come and claim the prize, they will be sent to guillotine for execution. That's a downside of that. So you have a reward, you have a penalty. This went around, people tried how you will try to imagine what the king had in his dream. Basically, that's the problem. Then we had a cunning merchant. He had a clever idea. So he thought that he will be able to fool a guy and he will try to get the presentation by himself. So what he did, he had a goldsmith from a faraway land who did not have a chance to know about this announcements and all. So he told that I want to have a crown made. He told only the part of the reward. If I get the crown, I will get weight of me as a gold reward. I will share 50% of that with you. But he did not mention everything about the penalty. So this poor goldsmith accepted the challenge. Though he did not know about this, slowly the people started talking about it. It has become the talk of the kingdom. That the king has announced, the goldsmith has taken the challenge and he is going to make a crown. So they were worried actually. So, but he was confident that somehow he will be saved from the rest of the king. So he didn't want to upset, or he don't want to back out from his whatever he promised. So he thought somehow he will be able to do that. However, what happened, because of this worry, like usually it happens to the family members, they were all talking about this issue all the time. And they were worried about that if he is not able to do that, he may be killed. As usual, the prince used to be going in the forest, in the deep woods. It came to his ears that this goldsmith is trying to do something. There is a risk of his life for doing that. Then one fine morning, the merchant brought the goldsmith, and they came to the king's darbar, and they told that we have the crown here, you can come and inspect. As expected, the king found it was nowhere near to his dream, so he was very upset. He looked at the merchant in anger. The merchant distanced himself and he told that he subcontracted the work to a goldsmith, so it is not his fault after all. Yeah. So he was trying to be smart acting there so that he will not get the penalty. The king then started looking at the poor goldsmith. They asked, do you know what is going to be the punishment? Yeah. The goldsmith did not speak, but he was all in tears. as expected. Now, the prince came forward and he said to his dad, "Dad, the dream was many weeks ago, you had the dream. Perhaps you've forgotten that how the ground looked like in your dream. But recently I had a dream. I had exactly the same ground came in the dream. Yeah. So this is the ground, I had it in my dream. Perhaps this is the same ground, you also had it in your dream." So he told that, "See, it is fitting my head. It is as per my dream. So I am going to reward this goldsmith, and this is going to be the ground when I become the king." So everybody was astonished at the prince's gesture. They were happy, they were relieved. The goldsmith was spared, and the prince taught the lesson of fit for purpose. Yes. Got it? So now let us put this historical perspective into our day-to-day life. He is the employer. Yeah. He is the main contractor. He is the specialist subcontractor. Yeah. The artist who could not produce, he is the engineer. The drawing which as per the employer's dream, he is the engineer. That is the employer's requirement. Yeah. And that's the penalty. Yeah. Now let's move on. Then finally, who is the prince? Arbitrator or a litigator? That's the story of fit for purpose. Yeah. When I was in Bahrain, I was working for a consultant for one of the leading national banks. We did 30 proposals. The architect made 30 proposals to the client. He wasn't happy with anything. So we said how to handle this client. There was a brainstorming. And finally we come up with the idea. Let's suggest the employer to give the job on a design build. Let us see that who is going to do what the client wants. So naturally the client cannot write the employer's requirement. He wanted our help to write the employer's requirement. We made sure that how hard we can make it for the poor contractor. So we did all that, and finally we got employed as employer's representative on the project. It went long, and finally went into arbitration. I don't have to tell you about the project. So normally, the fit for purpose is like that. You are not able to explain what you want, and finally you are trying to pull out, saying that it is not meeting my purpose, so you are failed in your duty. That's basically, this is where it is used as like a catch-all clause. How do we deal with that? What does it mean to the construction contracts? This is what we are going to discuss today. Let's say that you buy a smartphone. Yeah. The smartphone will not make you smart, of course, but of course it is expected to handle all your business operations in a smart way. These days the smartphones are very smart except for the battery life. Yeah. So there is an implied obligation that when you buy a smartphone, it will make your day-to-day business operations in a smart way. There is definitely there. So that means it has to be fit for the purpose for which it is bought. It's as simple as that. So when you buy a product, you expect that to perform certain purpose. It should do that. If it is not that, then it is failed. Now, there is a difference in how it is handled in a sale of goods or sale of services, supply of services. Yeah. There is a different requirement in each of these cases. Again, we have to go back to the common law to start with, for us to have a proper understanding. We will come back to the civil code in a minute. Under common law, the fit for obligation is definitely there for supply of goods and services in a different way. Yeah. In fact, it is a statutory requirement in the common law most other countries. This fit for purpose is very well written there in the statutory requirement. Let's take the petty contracts also. There is a requirement of fit for purpose for supply of goods. Of course, the same wording is not used. It's used in a different way. I'll explain it in a minute. So, for supply of goods, there is no going back. The product, whatever you are supplying, have to adhere to the fit for purpose requirement. So, what does it mean here? Basically, that's basically a quality requirement here. So, this is a statutory Sales of Goods Act 1979. It says there is an implied term. We all know that the contracts can have an express term or an implied term. In this case, even if the contract does not expressly say that it has to be fit for purpose, it will be still implied that supplied goods have to fit for purpose. So it is written down in the statute. So there is no going back to that. Coming back to other common law jurisdictions, Singapore is another common law. There is again Sale of Goods Act. There is a requirement there. Even in India, Sale of Goods Act is there. It is again mirroring the same terminology what we have in the UK Sales of Goods Act. Now let's look at it. What's happening with the international contracts? Let's say that you are buying goods from another country. Because the statutory requirements of UK or Singapore or India, these are for the domestic contracts. You buy something within the country, then you will be able to go and sue the person that if it is not fitting to the purpose. So what's happening with the international contracts? CASG, that's what we call it, Contracts for International Sale of Goods. Here, even this days, the goods will not be conformed to the requirement unless the fit for purpose obligation is met. So if you buy something from a Dragon Mart, you can go and sue China. Yeah, that's what it means. When there is a contracting between two countries, or the contractors involved in two different jurisdictions, still CAG says that supply of goods have to conform to the fit for purpose obligation. This has been confirmed. I will be referring to some of the case laws here because just to make this more authentic and interesting. If you want to have this, you can go and read the case law further. I will talk about it in the case law in a minute. So this has been confirmed. The CAG will be applied for any kind of international sales. Coming back to civil law, the French Civil Code explicitly says that sale of goods have to have the fit for purpose obligation. It says very clearly there. Similarly, the German Civil Code also has a requirement that it has to have the fit for purpose. If you know very well that the Civil Code, that there are only two origins, either it's the French division or the German division. So naturally, you would have expected all the Civil Code of countries which followed the French one supposed to have this obligation inherited. Like for example, the UAE Civil Code, which is actually mirrored from the Egyptian Civil Code. The Egyptian Civil Code, actually the mother of that is the French Civil Code, and the Sharia law or Majalla Code of Ottoman Empire. Put together, the Egyptian Civil Code was made. So naturally, you would expect the requirement of fit for purpose from a French Civil Code flowing down to the Egyptian and to the other Civil Codes. Unfortunately, that is not the case. The UAE Civil Law does not specifically talk about fit for purpose requirement in their Civil Code. This is what the Article 875 says. If the employer stipulates the contractor should provide the materials for the work, he will be responsible for the quality in accordance with conditions of the contract. At the maximum, it says only it should be to the conditions of contract. So you should understand the Civil Code very clearly says the contract is the law of contracting parties. There is a freedom of contract there, pacta sunt servanda, that is freedom for contract. So you are free to, it's your free will what you want to contract with other contracting body. So as long as your contract has a requirement for fit for purpose in your contract, you are not going to get any concession from the civil law judges, like what you have in your LDs and other things. They will be coming for your rescue, that you didn't incur any cost, so you will not be getting your LDs, Article 392. You are not going to get that kind of a facility here. If your contract has a fit for purpose, you have to comply with that. That's what the Civil Code, the UAE Civil Code talks about it. Now let's go back to FEDIC. I am taking it for the purpose of easiness, the 1900 book. 7.1, the manner of execution. It says it has to be, the work have to be the proper workmanlike and careful manner in accordance with such recognized good practice. This is the exact wording for the supply of goods in the FEDIC 99 contract. As usual, this workmanlike, reasonableness, fair and reasonable, these are all there. FEDIC has borrowed this terminology from the common law. There is no real thing like what is a workmanlike man, what is fair and reasonable, what is a reasonable person in reasonable time. These kind of terminology the FEDIC definitely has. We have to open it up and we have to understand, and a given circumstance how this will be working like. Thankfully, the commentators on FEDIC have told this workmanlike manner and a careful manner means definitely it is implied the fit for purpose obligation. You have to understand the FEDIC, though it is coming from Europe, the roots of that is from the UK's common law. Until FEDIC 4th edition, the FEDIC was mirroring only the common law principles. The first attempt was made to incorporate the civil law principles only the FEDIC 99 rainbow suits. So though we have some of the civil concepts incorporated into the current FEDIC edition, when it comes to that, it is not openly saying that it is to be fit for purpose. It says workmanlike manner as recognized in the industry. So it means very clearly it has to have a fit for purpose for the quality intended. So as far as supply of service is concerned, this is little different here. When we say supply of services, we are talking about architects, lawyers and accountants, why not even quantity surveyors. So if you are giving a service rather than selling a goods, so you have a different obligation as against the one what we saw for a fit for purpose. What it is. Here, if you say that if the doctor has to be fit for purpose, then if you go to him and if you are not get cured, you can go and sue the doctor. Because you are sick, you went to the doctor, he has given you medicine, you did not become well. So he is not fit to be a doctor. As simple as that. I'll tell you one funny thing. I went to India last month. In one of the big hospitals, they put a big caption. As a doctor, it is our duty to give you medication. However, it is the duty of the God to cure you. So they preempt that. So nobody can come and they complain that I did not get cured. Of course, they put it for a different purpose. They say that it's all praise, it will only work. We are only just the tools in hands of the God. That's what they meant. But you can use it to show what it is. So basically, it's not applicable for a fit for purpose obligation. Is not applicable for the supply of services. So what they are supposed to be doing? There is another obligation in the common law principle again, reasonable care and skill. So this is actually, if you want to call it, it's a lower obligation. So if you go to a doctor, the doctor treats you, and if you won't tell that I didn't get well, you are negligent, he will come back and tell, look, if you would have gone to any other doctor for the condition what you had, they would have given you the same medication or the same treatment. So as long as I am not negligent, I have used my reasonable skill and care, I have discharged my obligation. So you can't expect anything more than that. So the design has to meet. So if you are a designer, if you are an architect, if you are a structural designer, it has to meet only the standard expected of a competent designer of a similar trade. So if you are an architect, if the other architect would have come with the same kind of a proposal, then you discharge your obligation as far as your obligation is concerned. So this is common for all the professions, lawyers, doctors, even the architects, all follow the same principle. There are a lot of fellow graduates here, I can understand, I can remember, you may be remembering that Bolam principle in the principle of TAR, you might have heard about it. This is actually a case where the doctor did not give a relaxing medication to the patient. He was given electromagnetic convulsive treatment. The patient broke her pelvic bone. Then he sued the hospital. So then, whether the relaxant drug was to be given before this treatment or not, there was a divided medical opinion. So the court could not conclude whether the doctor was negligent or not negligent. So he said that as long as one professional body says that it is not required, so then we would consider that the reasonable care and skill has been discharged. So whenever you talk about the reasonable care and skill, this Bolam principle is the foremost. So even if you have been accused that you did not take care of the proper quantities, you can say that Bolam principle, I have done reasonable care and skill. Yeah. So for a design service, the architect have to be only to have, he is not under the obligation of fit for purpose, he is only reasonable care and skill. As long as the services are equivalent to that of a similar architect of similar profession, he has discharged his responsibility for his supply of services. So coming back to the FEDIC White Book, it's a consultancy service agreement. It says the duty of care and exercise of authority. The consultant shall exercise reasonable care and skill and diligence in performance of obligations. So if you take a job under FEDIC White Book, Model Services Agreement, so definitely you don't have to worry. So it's very clear that you have to use only reasonable care and skill. So what it is we have understood. Are we making some sense here? What is a fit for purpose? So am I fit for purpose? Okay, why it is important? Now, let's say that supply of services, reasonable care and skill, supply of goods, fit for purpose. It's very clear. So happy days, no ambiguity, nothing. Let's get into murky field now. We have design and build now. We have to design, the contractor have to design, and he has to build. So actually partially he should have reasonable care and skill for the design portion, and for the quality portion he should have fit for purpose. That's what we would have expected, because normally that's what the architects are doing, that's what the surveyors are doing, that's what the engineers are doing. So for the supply of services we expected to have a reasonable care and skill. Unfortunately that's not the case. When you are doing a design build contract, your end product have to comply with the fit for purpose requirement. You got the difference now. So the one person is giving supply of goods and supply of services. So suddenly his obligation to provide the supply of services from a lower obligation of reasonable care and skill to a higher obligation of fit for purpose. So this is again, I will come back to this case. It's IBA and EMA Electronics. It's an English case. So in this case, the judge made it very clear that when it's a design build contract and the contractor is obligated to do design and construction, so he is obligated to provide fit for purpose. So the rationale behind that is when the employer, the client, is relying on the skills of the person for both the services, for the supply of services and the construction. So the final product has to be the fit for purpose. There is no way the obligations can be divided into two, that okay, as far as design is concerned, he has taken a reasonable care, and when it comes to the construction, he will provide the fit for purpose. In terms of to borrow the same wording from the Honorable Judge, this is what he told. We see no good reason for not importing an obligation to reasonable fitness purpose in the contracts, or importing a different obligation in relation to design from the obligation which plainly exists in relation to supply of materials. That means when you are obligated to do both the things, there is no way or no reason, no valid reason for me to divide that obligation into two parts and to apply a different test for one area and a different test for the other area. So as far as I am concerned, you have taken the responsibility to do both. For me, it has to be fit for purpose. This is what he made it very clear in the Court of Appeal. This is still standing, this case is still standing, it is not overturned anywhere. Coming back to our FEDIC Yellow Book 4.1, as you know that FEDIC 99 suit, all the clauses, most of the clauses which will be similar. Even in the Red Book there is a 4.1 in the contractor's obligation, it starts with that. I will come to that in a minute. The Silver Book, the contractor shall design, execute, complete the works in accordance with the contract. The work shall be fit for purposes for which the works are intended as defined in the contract. It's a wording taken from the Yellow Book. Coming back to the Silver Book, the identical wording. There is nothing changed. The same wording is there. Fit for purposes for which works are intended as defined in the contract. So, we have seen the common law judges, what they are looking at it when it comes to design build. So that the concept has been borrowed by the standard form of contract for FEDIC 99 suit. If you are obligated to do a project on Yellow or Silver Book, your design has to meet the fit for purpose requirement. Even in Red Book, you know very well, Red Book also there is a part of design, there is a wording there and it says in the bracket to the extent specified in the contract. Yeah. When the contractor is obligated to do even a small portion of the design, like for example the precast elements, maybe the consultant wants to contractor to design. When you take any part of the design into your contract, it has to have the fit for purpose obligation for the portion of the work, even in a Red Book contract. And this is absolute duty. There is no going back. Yeah. Old days, the 4th edition, the FEDIC did not use the fit for purpose, it was using the due care and diligence in design. Yeah. When it comes to the design, this is what the old FIDIC book 87 suit, they have used only due care and diligence. However, when it comes to the 99 edition, the contractor shall design to the extent specified in the contract. Then when you come down, the contractor shall be responsible for this part, the work completed, fit for purposes specified in the contract. So an unamended FIDIC contract, even in the red book, if the contractors have to take any obligation for design, there is an obligation for fit for purpose. Now, basically the idea is the design build contractor is providing a product. Yeah. The product has two elements, design and construction. So the whole product has to be viewed as a one product, and what kind of test you will be able to apply for that. Now, do you think that it is fair? When it comes to consultants who are all professionals in the market, they have been led away with a lower obligation of reasonable care and skill. Whereas a contractor, for 90% of the time, he will be doing build only. Occasionally, he will be taking a contract with the design and build, but he has been obligated to do a higher obligation of fit for purpose than the normal work which the supplier services provider undertakes. What do you think about it? Fair or not fair? Simple answer.
Not fair.
Not fair. There would be some rationale behind it, isn't it? The honorable judges and FIDIC and all would not be just like that imposing something on the whole contract. Yeah. So design professionals don't assume it. So we know very well. This is where the magical balance. Okay. We might have seen the seesaw. What it is actually basically, the contract is self-interest to save money. When you take a design and build, he puts his money first before the design. So he is taking it on overall. Like I am going to do in a competitive bid. I am going to design an optimum design. That's why he is taking the job. So his interest would be always saving the cost and maximizing the profit. That is there always. Yeah. So when you are giving this opportunity for him to make money, so you have to tell him there has to be some obligation for him. The design has to be at least minimum acceptable standard. It has to be there. If you don't have that one, then the contractor is walking away with all the benefits, whereas he is not having any obligation to make sure that the final product meets the client's requirement. Got it? Now, obviously there is going to be a problem if you are a design build contractor, if you are going to take some work on a silver and a book. If you are a traditional contractor, the employer has two different parties engaged. Design consultant, he will come under the white book, reasonable care and skill. The contractor will come under fit for purpose for the purpose of the quality of goods. No issue. Now let's come to that design build or EPC contract. The employer will be putting a fit for purpose obligation in his contract. And if the contractor wants to hire a design consultant, do you think that he will be willing to take the fit for purpose? Because he is not taking it from the employer. Why the hell he is going to take from the contractor? So it will be a hard time for a contractor to sell that FFP obligation downstream. So you can't do back to back here. So if the consultant is strong, he is going to tell that no, I am not going to take it. My professional service, I can take only reasonable care and skill. So this scope gap, who is going to take it? Who is going to take the risk? Naturally, the contractor has to take. Of course, fit for purpose is a tougher obligation on the part of the designer. We know very well. There was a question asked why the fit for purpose was not provided for the design consultants. The response came, if you have this obligation, you are not going to have any kind of innovation in your projects. You see the Al building in Abu Dhabi. Do you think that if you have a fit for purpose, any consultant would be putting their risk there to come and do that? So, okay, tomorrow somebody can go back and say that, okay, he can say that I have done reasonable care and skill. It's easy to walk away. So if you want to have any innovation, you have to have some kind of a leeway for the designer to come up with some new ideas. If you are going to make him stick to a tougher obligation, so you cannot have all rectangular buildings everywhere. So that's one of the reasons there it was told that the designers are not expected to give the fit for purpose obligation. The other thing is, let's say that there is a problem with the design. In case of a reasonable care and skill, the employer have to prove that designer was negligent in his duties. Without that, there was an obligation to exercise reasonable care and skill. Finally, the employer believes that the designer was negligent in his duties, so he can go against him, suing him for a fat sum. Okay, fine. What's the problem for the designers? Because he is not going to give away all the money from his pocket. He is going to give it from his professional indemnity. Right? So now, unfortunately, professional indemnity does not cover fit for purpose obligation. So let's assume an imaginary conversation. You are an architect. A villa owner wanted to have a swimming pool in his compound. The job was completed. The employer wasn't happy. He is saying that he is going to sue the consultant, the architect. So the architect is calling his professional indemnity insurer. Okay, the insurer is telling, okay, fine, you are a long-term client. We understand your case. We will do all our best to ensure that the claim is settled in a good time. By the way, has the negligence have been proved? He said, what the hell you are talking? I am not negligent in my design. My design was perfect. Then there is a claim coming from. No, this is a different contract. Another lawyer drafted a contract. We didn't know that there is a fit for purpose obligation. That guy is telling that you don't have to prove any negligence. So, by the way, your professional indemnity does not cover. So what the hell? So you are at risk now. So if you are having a PA brother, if you want to have the FFP, you have to talk to them to make sure. But 99% of the time, no indemnity will cover your fit for purpose obligation. The problem with the insurers, I tried to do a little bit of research on that. They say that how do we quantify? How do we make sure that what was the purpose the client had in his mind? The swimming pool, what I am talking about, it was a real case. Actually, he wanted a diving pool, but the pool was only 1.2 meter deep when he designed. So you can't definitely dive. You can use it as a swimming pool, but he expected that to be a diving pool. So he says that it did not serve my purpose. So the employer is right in his way. If he has clearly specified that he wanted a diving pool, and if he is not an integrated consultant, a client, so he was expecting on the skills of the designer to make sure that the swimming pool will be fit for the purpose. In this case, it was not. Had it been a reasonable care and skill, he would have walked away. But in this case, he gets caught. So, since the professional indemnity is not covering that, so there is no way you will be able to take any liability from any design failure if you are a designer, because the UOP will nowhere cover. So there is a real problem there. So to add further problem to that, it is an implied obligation? So if it is express obligation, it is okay. You read the contract, you understand, is it an express term, what I am supposed to do or what I am not supposed to do. If it is an implied obligation, even if it is not very clearly written in the contract, it will be implied that you are supposed to be conforming to that implied obligation. In sale of goods, it's very clear, it will be implied. 1979 Act says, when you supply something, even if it is not specifically written in the contract, there will be an implied obligation, it will be the case. In case of a design build, the common law very clearly they made it. If it's a design build contract, the contract is obligated. Even if it is not specifically meant written in your contract, the fit for purpose obligation, you cannot get away, it is an implied obligation. So you may be reading through the contract, it may not say the fit for purpose. So normally the lawyers try to disguise the fit for purpose in a various different terminologies so that you will not be able to catch it up. Yeah. So, but whether it is there or not there, in disguised form it is there, it's an implied obligation. So no getting away. This is one of the very old cases, 19th century case. Here the claimant went for a race course. He was sitting in the stadium in the gallery. The gallery gave away and he fell down and broke his leg. So he was suing the employer for the damages. The employer said it is not my fault, it is the contractor who built it. It was his fault. But however, since he paid the contractor and he relieved the contractor of obligations, the employer was instructed to compensate the guy who got injured. So since then, this implied obligation in the contracts been hovering around from the 19th century. So we know that we learned what it is. We learned why it is important. Now, how do we get out of this mess? Okay, we told that fit for purpose obligation is an implied obligation. It's clear, right? However, the purpose cannot be implied from the contract. There is a difference here. Fit for purpose is implied, but you cannot expect the contractor to imply the purpose for which it is built. Am I making it clear here? So, if you get caught, first point we have to look at is, has the purpose has been defined very well in the contract? If it is not there, then nobody can come back and imply the purpose into your obligation. This is a case actually where there was a fire protection system was required. The contractor did the design, but there was a fire broke. They installed the fire design, did not douse the fire. It went to the court. So the employer was arguing that it was not satisfying the fit for purpose requirements. They went through the contract. They never told that it's going to be inflammable liquids are going to be in the godown. So he provided probably a basic water-based fire protection system, which was not sufficient for dousing the fire. So the judge set aside and he said that the purpose was not properly defined in the contract, so the contractor cannot be sued for the fit for purpose obligation. This is one of the recent case actually. Then another one is, this is a New Zealand case where an Australian company, they bought a lot of trucks from a New Zealand company. When the trucks came to Australia, they could not register the trucks under the Australian requirement of the transport regulations. So they sued that this is not fit for purpose. The court finally told that the statutory requirements cannot be a fit for purpose requirement. That cannot be. You wanted a truck, can it do the job? Yes, it can do the job. But if you cannot register them as you wanted, did you mention in your contract what is the statutory requirements to register a truck of that capacity? You didn't do that, so no fit for purpose. So if it is a statutory obligation, you cannot be expected to comply fit for purpose. It has to be clearly spelled out in the contract. So the purpose has to be spelled out. It cannot be a statutory purpose. Of course, this is about the design profession. They made it very clear. So even statutory wise, even the case law wise, the design professionals are never going to be under any trouble having a fit for purpose obligation unless all these are met. It has to be reasonable, it has to be a business efficacy. You can never going to win against any designer for putting him under the obligation of fit for purpose. He will walk away easily with a reasonable carrying scale. Okay, coming back to fitting. So what do we do with fitting? Fitting says all these books, if you read it carefully, the works shall be fit for the purposes for which the works are intended as defined in the contract. That is the key for you. To get into this mess, you have to look, you have to hang on that as defined in the contract. Did the contract define what is the purpose for which this is being built? If you are able to come out of that, you come out. Otherwise you are in a mess. So when you are making there is an employee's requirement. If you are voting for a yellow book contract, if it is not making it clear for you that what is the purpose for which it is being made, you have to get it clarified in the tender process. Your contractor's proposal have to clearly address what you are providing. You have to ask it in a different way. This is what I understand from your employee's requirement. Am I right? Yeah? Because the employee's requirement, the employer may not be able to write it in no uncertain terms. So you need to make sure you understand the purpose very well before you take your obligation. So if it is not defined, there is a way for you to get out of that. Otherwise, you are into trouble. The other way, if you get into arbitration, you are into trouble where things have gone beyond, you have an arbitration clause. Normally what we can do, they do that expert witness. These days, instead of bringing experts from your side, the other party bringing another expert, both arguing each other, the arbitrators will say that get both the experts, let's do a combined session. There is a terminology loosely called hot topping. Definitely that's not the hot topping we are talking about. So these two experts will be asked to sit together and analyze the contract and try to come out what was the real obligation on that, what was the contractor to do that. So the experts will do it in two stages. First they will try to see whether the contract can be correctly interpreted, whether the purpose has been defined in the contract. Stage 1. If it is yes, whether that obligation has been confirmed or not confirmed. So if it gone beyond the normal dispute into arbitration, so you have to have the experts who will be able to say for you that the purpose was not clearly defined. Such a lost opportunity for you to get it. To put it together, if you are doing a low book or a silver book contracts, don't take it lightly. Even in a red book contract, if you are having some obligations, make sure that you understand the purpose. The employers always want to have the fit for purpose because it's very easy for them to sue you. They don't have to prove any negligence. So it's a tougher obligation on the part of the designer. And if you are a designer, probably you will understand the risk. If you are a contractor, you may be hoodwinked to take the job on the assumption that there will not be any problem. So you've been working with the client for many years on a red book contract. So you know very well what the client wants. There could be a problem. When you take it as a contractor, then you may have a hard time because no designer would be taking the fit for purpose obligation because his professional indemnity is not going to cover this obligation. So it's going to be a problem for you to sell it across. So if you are doing a silver book or a design build contracts, this will be of great importance for you. So that's all I have. So very short and sweet. There is a feedback form I would expect you to fill. Take 2-3 minutes. You don't have to put your name if you don't want, but I want a honest feedback. You can. Of course, if you have questions, I am available. And if you want a detailed article on this, you can take this URL, you can download this article, which is dealing in a much greater length about this obligation. You may be interested to read, maybe tonight after going home.
Any questions, please?
It's not directly on that, but so yeah. It was one of that hot topic you mentioned.
Yeah.
We had a case where a joint statement had to be made by the expert witness, and amongst the various heads, they didn't see eye to eye on many, and finally the joint statement was with an expert, both experts, independent opinion, and then the arbitrator had to take a call. So, in such a case, what happens? How will the arbitrator?
Arbitrator says, the thing is, when it comes to expert witness statements, arbitrator is not obligated to take the expert witness statements in his award. It is only an aid for him because he may not be an expert in that area. So he may want to have an expert's view. So he can take or he can set aside. Even in court here, after doing all the expert witness, expert statements, the law is saying the judge can leave it aside and he can give award or judgment on his own. So the purpose is to bring them to a common platform, to come some kind of a understanding. If it is not coming, so Mr. X said, Mr. Y said, that's expert statement. Perhaps the arbitrator has to take a call. Or perhaps he may employ his own expert to have his unbiased view. That's not normal, but he can also do that. That's another way they can do that.
Anybody?
Under the design and freight contract, there are two key documents. One is the employer requirement, one is the contractor's proposal. Now the employer requirement says this is what I wish to have, and the contractor's proposal says this is what I am providing. So under the contract, when the contract is awarded, which document takes precedence when it comes to this application. If there are departures from the employer requirements, the contract proposals probably did not specify, but if you go through it, there are clear departures. Then how that is considered when it comes to this application?
When it comes to priority of documents, the employer's requirements go more than the contractor's proposal. In fact, you have schedules after the employer's requirement, then only the contractor's proposal comes down. So when you go by the priority of documents, the employer's requirement will be the higher priority in interpreting a contract. The good practice, if you want to have a design contract, the employer's requirement, the contractor's proposal, somebody has to sit and do a matrix, what is agreed, what is not agreed. So both the parties, before signing the contract, they can come to some kind of a platform. You can't get away with all the disputes in the contract, but the majority of that. So we normally recommend, if you have a D&B contract or a fellowship contract, to go and sit with the employer and at the time of negotiation, to have a common document which both parties sign together, and we put that as part of the contract, rather than this kind of a priority. But when you transfer your question straight, the employer's requirements will have the higher priority over the contract proposal.
Yeah. Generally, sometimes we include schedule of departures, like where we don't comply with the employer requirements. In this case, probably it will be some sort of relief. If something is clear,
it depends upon the final letter says that what is everything, all the qualifications withdrawn, then you may have a trouble there. If the employer understands the deviations, then it's okay, no real issue. But normally the best way is to have a common matrix put together into the contract rather than leaving into that. In fact, we had this issue when we were advising a subcontractor. For 6 months we had this trouble. The problem was the main contractor took the job on a EPC. He had appointed a design consultant, and there was an MEP subcontractor appointed. So he wants to have a back-to-back contract. We were trying to explain, look, you can't do that because you have a main contract. For you, the SFP is your obligation, but you are already appointing a design consultant to do the design. So I am not going to do any design. I am doing only supply of goods. So I am ready to take the fit for purpose for the quality. If you buy a switch, it should switch on, switch off. I will do that. But if the switch rating is good enough or sufficient, that is not for me to do that. It went up to the legal thing. We have to go and sit in front of the legal team. They appointed an external legal. So finally, we managed to convince them that that obligation should not be back-to-back to the initial contractor. It took time, but finally we were able to convince.
Anybody?
In one building contract, in the basement 3, in the network of the columns, grid network, one column is seen as missing. But in the first basement, one column is missing.
Column is missing?
Yeah, it's not seen in the drawing,
Okay.
basement. But basement 200, yes, the straight line, there is a column.
Okay.
So contractor asked for clarification. Then engineer replied, yes, columns provided, design is given by engineer. They consultant also. They claim for the cost of the column, whether it's a variation or not.
Anybody wants to answer this? Because it's not a fit for purpose here.
No.
It's not in the drawing.
Not in the drawing.
it's shown in the second.
Basement 200 is there is column, but they miss one
That
column.
drawing is not there.
No,
In the-
basement 3 is one.
See, I tell you,
But logically, if any column above is coming, there must be column below. So they ask for clarification.
if I am a contractor, I will go and build a column because I have a Diconian liability. If there is a problem, I am going to carry the liability for 10 years. So I wouldn't mind constructing one extra column to make sure that I don't have any problem for 10 years. That may be a prudent decision. But contractually, if the column was not there and if you are going to ask, here actually, if I am the employer, I will pay the contractor, get it from the consultant. Because he did not provide the design. But when you come to this kind of civil code, the contractor cannot get away from these kind of structural issues. So he will be responsible for 10 years along with the designers. So if there is going to be a crack or any kind of a safety issue, it will be a major. So considering that, my advice would be go and construct it.
Otherwise, contractor can any design without a column in the basement tree and same structure in same.
That's the risk proportion.
It is key proportion, proposal, yes.
Yeah. You are taking obligation for something because you are doing a small portion of the entire design. You are not taking the entire obligation. Tomorrow something goes wrong, the consultant will say that I didn't do that. I wanted the column. It was the contractor's responsibility. So I wouldn't go anywhere near this kind of penny-wise pound foolish kind of.
Thank you.
Yes, please. In infrastructure design project, actually, there is a problem in the pipeline alignments. Design fault is there. During construction phase, the pipes are crossing and they have to change alignments. There is abortive work is coming due to the design. So this will pay the contractor, employer is asking to pay the designer, or the designer can claim as can claim from compensation from insurance.
See, this will not come under the fit for purpose. Actually, if you ask me, this is unforeseen conditions, class 4.10 in the predict 99. If the services are there below and if the contractor has taken the job, normally the risk is unforeseen at the time of tender by a reasonable contractor with the employer.
He found it during concession stage, the pipelines are obstructed.
No, that's what I'm saying. If the pipes are
So
existing
really
pipes,
what-
if the pipes are existing pipes,
Not a new design, infrastructure design. So there are 2-3 pipes going up. But some requirement, the pipe level has to change, then he has to abort the work, realign the pipes. This is a fault of design. So the designer has to pay for this, or the employer will ask the designer to pay for the contractor.
that's what I told you. He has only a reasonable care and skill. So what was the information given to him for through the design? So it's not a straightforward yes or no answer here. We need to see what was the obligation the contractor has taken, because these days the petty contracts are amended so much. Some of the contracts even read that the contractor has to vet the design. If any design errors during the tender process, he has to bring it to the attention of the employer. He has not come back. It deemed to be that he is vetting the design. So any design issues, it's to the contractor's fault, contractor's risk. We had this kind of clauses in the contract. So without looking at the contract, it would be difficult to say who's responsible for.
But the designer is designing the project.
No,
He has to take care of it.
It's not that straightforward, unfortunately. The contracts are not that straightforward. We have to read the exact obligations, who has taken the risk for what.
Contractor pricing the work actually, he don't care for the designs.
No, we can't say that. We can't say that.
During execution stage, you come to know there is an obstruction, the levels are done. It is a design fault.
If you give me the contract, I can read it and I can tell you. Without that, it can't be a straightforward answer one way or other. That's what I
So
would
the
say.
reimbursement to the from the employer only, not from the designer.
That's what I'm saying. I can't say anything.
Unique structure of one for one of a kind. You go and design and build a 1.6 kilometer long.
So you won't do it normally. I don't think any prudent contractor will take that kind of risk.
Yeah,
That's the reason any kind of iconic project will not be a design build. You could have seen that. It would have been very easy for the employer to put a DNB or a EPC to do that. Normally they don't do that because they know that the innovation, you cannot kill the innovation with the fit for purpose. So you need to allow them to come back with your proposals.
Okay. I hope our questions are fit for the purpose and it answered and who wants to become a merchant or a contractor, whatever it is. It's a good story in Abdali. And let us give him a big round of applause, please. I request Mr. Sajid Siddharthan to present the vote of thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I know it's summer and you are in holiday mood, and a big thanks to Venkat for accepting to be our speaker. Our main task is to give a rainbow of topics so that you go through all the topics that is covered in contracts or in paper. So I know it is a bit hard in the summer to hear fit for purpose, but definitely one time in your life, in your career, you will come to a stage where you will have to deal with this. And I think Venkat did a very good job. to explain in a very simple way. And also I will request you to suggest some speakers for different topics so that we can also give invitation. Thank you very much.